It looks like we just dodged World War III and parried a regional war. For now, worry not, that could all change tomorrow. Because Israel and Iran directly struck each other on their own territory for the first time in history this week. I think that the weapons, tactics, and targets each side chose just revealed a lot to us about their respective capabilities and the message that each side was intending to send to the other. So the big question everyone wants to know right now is what extent of Iran's offensive capabilities did they actually use? How much damage did they really intend to deliver? Was this all essentially the equivalent of a warning shot, a limited strike, or was it meant to inflict massive damage? I think there's some evidence to support both of those theories, so I'll present each side to you now, and I'll add some of my own personal insights so you can make up your own mind. First, the facts. Iran's April 13th attack on Israel included 130 ballistic missiles, 30 cruise missiles, and 170 of the smaller kamikaze drones for about a total of 330 munitions. In military parlance, we call that a strike package, which refers to a coordinated grouping of different military assets deployed to execute a specific strike mission against an enemy target. Or another way of putting that is Iran specifically chose those three types of weapons for a very specific purpose. The evidence to support the first theory, that this was not Iran's full capabilities, comes from the Iranian claim that they gave the United States, Turkey, Jordan, and Iraq 72 hours of warning that they would launch this attack. They claim that they added a diplomatic tag onto that strike package by essentially telegraphing in advance that they would launch an air attack on Israel. Now, Turkey, Jordan, and Iraq all confirm that Iran gave them 3 days of warning. If we take them at their word and believe that, then it's also likely that one of them passed on that information to the United States under the table unofficially. The reason to believe this is because the US military's close relationship with all three of those countries. However, the United States officially claims that they were given no such warning. The claim here is that the United States, Israel, United Kingdom, and Jordan all had 72 hours to move air defense assets into the region to have them on high alert, ready for the attack. Proponents of this theory also point to the fact that it took 12 days for Iran to retaliate after Israel struck their embassy in Syria, instead of attacking right away. Another point brought up in this theory is that Iran only fired 130 of their 3,000 ballistic missiles in their arsenal. The idea that this was only meant to be a limited strike also has to do with the fact that the Shahed drones that were used only travel at about 185 kilometers per hour, so it took between 6 to 9 hours to reach Israel. In fact, I remember what it felt like to hear about the attack on the news, and then there was this really long period of over 6 hours where everyone kind of awkwardly and stressfully waited for these slow-moving drones to make their way across the region to see what effect they would eventually have. And even if we are to believe that the United States was given 3 days warning, how would we know that they'd be able to shoot all those down? We only know that in hindsight. More evidence also comes from what didn't happen as much as what did happen, because there was no second salvo. It estimated to cost Israel between $500 million and $1 billion worth of anti-air defense munitions to shoot down the Iranian attack, which likely cost them $200 million on their end. So the question is, for how long of a sustained period of time could this type of attack be prevented? A counterpoint to that would be if Iran continued missile salvos and strikes like this for a longer period of time, then Israel would choose to go on the offensive with their allies with their own missile strikes to prevent them. Okay, for the second theory now. Let's assume this was actually Iran's best attempt at inflicting maximum damage on Israel. The evidence for this comes from the fact that this strike package is a meta we've seen before. It's the same tactics that Russian forces have used in their war in Ukraine to try to overwhelm Ukrainian air defense systems. The theory that this was intended to inflict maximum damage comes from the fact that the ballistic missile chosen by Iran, like the EMAD, fly at a supersonic speed of 3,800 miles per hour and travel in a high arcing trajectory that's difficult to shoot down, while cruise missiles fly lower at a more straight 750 miles per hour. Using these differing speeds and trajectories, these weapons and this weapon package suggest to us that Iran has every intention of causing massive amounts of damage with this attack. Yes, it's true that launching slow-moving drones give ample warning because it's quickly detected, but from Iran's point of view, that was worth it because they hoped that these drones would overwhelm, distract, and confuse Israel's air defenses for when the ballistic and cruise missiles arrived. Iran carefully timed the launch of their drones and ballistic missiles to arrive in the same window to confuse air defense systems. The Institute for the Study of War had an interesting take on this. They reported that the Ukrainians have an overall interception rate of about 46% for recent large-scale ballistic missile strikes against them, and sometimes that number is as low as 16% recently. The ISW states that this indicates that Iran had every reason to believe that Israel's interception rate would likely be around that, possibly a little bit higher. So the average infantryman math here suggests that even if the Iranian military planners believed 60% of their missiles would be intercepted, then that means that they expected 198 of their munitions to hit their intended targets. No one really anticipated that the US, Israel, and Allied interception rate would be between 95 and 99%. However, while that number is factually correct, it doesn't tell the whole story. When we look at the most dangerous and important metric, the ballistic missiles, that means that 93% of the ballistic missiles were intercepted. The fog of war still weighs heavily on this recent event because these numbers are still changing. A Wall Street Journal report indicates that in reality, about half of the ballistic missiles Iran fired failed to even reach their target. So about 65 missiles reached their target, and 9 of those got through. That suggests an interception rate lower of about 86%, which is still better than most experts would have anticipated, but it reveals that the US and its allies need to stay vigilant, and that underestimating our adversaries is not the right move. It also reveals that Iran's missiles are unreliable and poorly made currently, although that might not always be the case in the future. So, how do we know some of those Iranian launches failed? The US military surveillance satellites detected infrared heat signature bursts of missile launches that fizzled out, and some of those missiles were found to have not reached their target, having fallen halfway there in Iraq and Jordan. Photos have been posted of these failed launches all over the web already. The fact that Iran waited 12 days after Israel's strike on the embassy in Syria to retaliate might not have been because they wanted to telegraph their attack, but it might be evidence that they needed a week or two to get all of their missiles into position and out of the safety of their underground bunkers. They needed to prepare the launches and get everything into position. If you've ever served in any branch of the military anywhere, or if you've worked for a large corporation or government, you know how nothing gets done in less than 12 days. In fact, it's surprising that they were able to launch that kind of attack that quickly, and it could be taken that they didn't telegraph anything. Here's how the ISW put it. Quote, "The strike package from Iran was modeled on those that the Russians have used repeatedly against Ukraine to great effect. The attack caused more limited damage than intended, likely because the Iranians underestimated the tremendous advantages Israel has in defending against such strikes compared to Ukraine. The Iranians will learn lessons from this strike and work to improve their abilities to penetrate Israeli defenses over time, as the Russians have done in repeated strike series against Ukraine." So that is to say, even if Iran's attack failed to succeed at what it was trying to accomplish, we should not underestimate our adversaries and should not assume future strikes would also be unsuccessful. The fact that it failed to inflict more damage should be a huge relief, because as we'll soon see, Israel's retaliation was a far different style of attack, and it might have been a very muted one due to the limited damage. Another thing to consider is that this was a combined Allied effort on the part of Jordan, Israel, the United Kingdom, the US, to stop the incoming missiles. And there's no guarantee that those countries would step in to help again for Israel in the future under different circumstances. One point that could be in the favor of either theory is the fact that Hezbollah in Lebanon fired 70 rockets at Israel on April 13th, the same day of the Iranian attack. This might have been done in coordination to further saturate and weaken Israel's air defenses ahead of Iran's attack. Or you could say it was a limited strike and shows that if Iran really wanted to cause more damage, they would have requested a larger strike from Hezbollah. You might ask, why didn't Iran fire more ballistic missiles? They have 3,000 of them supposedly in their stockpile. Part of the reason for that might be because we forget that just because you have more missiles doesn't mean you have more launchers. It's likely Iran has between somewhere 100 and 200 missile launchers, which limits their ability to fire per salvo. One of the downsides of firing such a high volume of fire of munitions like Iran did is just how public it is. When you shoot 330 munitions, everyone would very publicly see the damage if a high percentage of them got through Israel's air defenses. Their airfield would be cooked if a lot of them hit their target. Instead, now that the dust has settled on these attacks, we have a better picture of what really happened. According to United States officials, a total of 9 Iranian missiles hit the ground in Israel. Iran claims it was their hypersonic missiles that hit their targets, and technically anything over Mach 5 or 3,800 miles per hour is hypersonic as far as I know. According to the US damage assessments, the missiles only managed to damage an Israeli C-130 aircraft on the airfield. In this day and age, damage assessments can be done a few days later by ordering a public satellite image of the location. Almost anyone can open source it now. The Associated Press investigated and saw the strike caused limited damage on Israel. This is why we know that the United States and Israel aren't lying about their interception rate. But that brings us to our next point, which is what was Iran really targeting inside Israel? What message were they trying to send with that target? They appear to have been targeting the Nevatim air base. It's said to be where they have struck the Iranian embassy from in Syria on April 1st, which killed 2 of their Quds Force generals. 5 of the Iranian ballistic missiles hit this airfield specifically. This suggests that the message Iran was trying to send, likely, was that this was in retaliation for Israel's strike on their consulate. Why did Israel attack the embassy and cross what is seen as a red line? From their perspective, Iran was using it as a means to plan attacks against them. Israel believes that Iran helped plan and execute the October 7th attack against them, and whether you believe that is true or not isn't the point when we try to understand why this happened, not whether or not it was justified. The fact that at least 1 or a handful of missiles got through Israel's air defenses could be a message that Iran is capable of putting pressure on them and hitting their targets, and to psychologically suggest what would happen if a larger weapon payload were used, like a nuclear strike, for example. The other target that Iran went after was the Negev airfield base in south of Israel, in the Negev desert, which is close to where Israel's nuclear facility is located. Israel is rumored to have nuclear weapons, which they neither confirm nor deny. 4 of the ballistic missiles hit this airfield in Israel. This could have been Iran attempting to send a message that they could strike Israel's nuclear capabilities if they wanted to. Now, when we look at the Israeli retaliation, now that the dust has settled, it appears Israel had a very different strike package and strategy, as well as different intended message. Reports as of right now indicate that Israel fired only 3 missiles with no real warning, and they neither confirmed nor denied they were behind it. Early reports suggest that these might have been 3 air-to-ground missiles that were fired by Israeli fighter jets. For years, we've heard reports of Israeli F-35 fighters entering and exiting Iranian airspace without them being detected. Israel has been training for this kind of stealth mission for years. So just the facts, on the night of April 18th, Israel struck Iranian air bases in the central city of Isfahan and Tabriz. Explosions were also heard in the Iraqi capital of Baghdad in Syria. Syria claimed that their air defense networks were hit by Israeli missiles. This low volume of fire could potentially be a way to send a message to Iran without forcing their hand to retaliate again with a large ballistic missile attack, which could stress expensive air defense systems. If Israel had attacked with their own large volume of ballistic and cruise missiles that we know they have, it would have escalated things further. Iran claimed the attack was only a few drones that they say they intercepted all of with their air defense systems. Again, open source satellite images allow us to verify what state media and officials claim and compare it to the truth. The BBC stated that they verified damage that was done to the Iranian Isfahan airbase, where anti-air systems were knocked out. Here are the images of the reported damage. How did the BBC do this damage assessment? Quote, optical imagery will be familiar to anyone who regularly uses Google Earth, essentially a photograph of the land below. SAR technology, on the other hand, uses radio waves to build an image of the Earth's surface. One S-300 Iranian air defense site appears to have been destroyed. We know that Iran has air bases all over their country, including several ones in closer proximity to Israel. So why might Israel have chosen to target this specific one in Isfahan? One theory is the fact that it was located only 120 kilometers, or about 1 hour's drive, from Iran's largest nuclear facility, the underground Natanz enrichment complex. Iran claims that their nuclear program is for purely peaceful purposes, while Israel believes that Iran is working on developing nuclear weapons at these sites. This is close to the same location where Iran is currently digging a new nuclear facility, which will be allegedly 90 meters underground and deep enough to be out of range of bunker buster airstrikes. So if Israel hypothetically wanted to send a message that they can get munitions through Iran's air defense systems and theoretically strike Iran's nuclear facility, the Isfahan air base would be the closest place to target. After this tit-for-tat exchange from Israel and Iran, state media from both sides downplayed the exchange.
It was not a strike. Two or three, very. they're like more like toys that our children play with, not drones. It was not worth telling us before it happened.
Iranian leader Khomeini said the following to this point. Quote, debates by the other party about how many missiles were fired, how many of them hit their targets, and how many didn't, these are of secondary importance. The main issue is the emergence of the Iranian nation and Iranian military's will in an important international arena. This is what matters. The debate about how many missiles were fired and if they hit their targets is kind of the primary importance if you ask me, but okay, difference of opinion there. From my perspective, it shows that we should double down on air defense, which is actually the main funding in the United States' $95 billion foreign aid package. $26 billion is earmarked for Israel, of that, $9 billion is for humanitarian aid for Gaza, and the rest is largely for Israeli air defense systems, which is likely one of the main things that I think helped prevented this from spiraling into a larger war for the time being. And both sides had incentive to claim less damage was done and that their air defense systems performed well. Israel did not push the claim that they caused great damage, and it appears like for now we've avoided World War III.